If you want to know everything about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard settlement, keep watching. Hi there, my name is Katherine. I'm a lawyer and I also think differently. In this video, we'll talk about 5 topics. The first, what are the terms of the settlement? Second, what does it mean as to the judgment in Judge Ascarati's court? Third, what does the settlement mean as to their respective appeals? Fourth, what considerations came into place when they were trying to settle their case? 5, what to expect next. So stay tuned all the way. As you know, on December 19, 2022, Amber Heard posted a statement about the settlement with Johnny Depp. This is the first time we heard about the settlement. I will read it and I won't make a comment while I'm reading it. Just wanted you to hear and read what she says in full, and then I'll comment about it later. So let's go ahead and do that. Her Instagram post says this: "After a great deal of deliberation, I have made a very difficult decision to settle the defamation case brought against me by my ex-husband in Virginia. It is important for me to say that I never chose this. I defended my truth, and in doing so, my life as I knew it was destroyed. The vilification I have faced on social media is an amplified version of the ways in which women are re-victimized when they come forward. Now I finally have an opportunity to emancipate myself from something I attempted to leave over 6 years ago, and on terms I can agree to. I have made no admission. This is not an act of concession. There are no restrictions or gags with respect to my voice moving forward. I make this decision having lost faith in the American legal system, where my unprotected testimony served as entertainment and social media fodder. When I stood before a judge in the UK, I was vindicated by a robust, impartial, and fair system, where I was protected from having to give the worst moments of my testimony in front of the world's media, and where the court found that I was subjected to domestic and sexual violence. In the US, however, I exhausted almost all my resources in advance of and during a trial in which I was subjected to a courtroom in which abundant direct evidence that corroborated my testimony was excluded, and in which popularity and power mattered more than reason and due process. In the interim, I was exposed to a type of humiliation that I simply cannot relive. Even if my US appeal is successful, the best outcome would be a retrial, where a new jury would have to consider the evidence again. I simply cannot go through that for a third time. Time is precious, and I want to spend my time productively and purposefully. For too many years, I have been caged in an arduous and expensive legal process, which has shown itself unable to protect me and my right to free speech. I cannot afford to risk an impossible bill, one that is not just financial but also psychological, physical, and emotional. Women shouldn't have to face abuse or bankruptcy for speaking her truth, but unfortunately, it is not uncommon. In settling this case, I am also choosing the freedom to dedicate my time to the work that helped me heal after my divorce, work that exists in realms in which I feel seen, heard, and believed, and in which I know I can effect change. I will not be threatened, disheartened, or dissuaded by what happened from speaking the truth. No one can and no one will take that from me. My voice forever remains the most valuable asset I have. I'd like to thank my outstanding appellate and original trial teams for their relentless hard work. I want to thank everyone who has supported me, and I turn my attention to the growing support that I've felt and seen publicly in the months since trial, and the efforts that have been made to show solidarity with my story. Any survivor knows that the ability to tell their story often feels like the only relief, and I cannot find enough words to tell you the hope your belief in me inspires, not just for me, but for all of you. Thank you. See you soon." That same day, on December 19, 2022, Johnny Depp's legal team also issued their own press release telling us about the settlement. I'll read their press release first and then I'll comment later as well. Johnny Depp's lawyers issued the following press release. A Brown Rudnick brand and reputation management team successfully negotiated a favorable settlement for actor Johnny Depp in his defamation case against ex-wife Amber Heard. Both sides will dismiss their respective appeals in the Virginia Court of Appeals on December 22nd. Under the terms of the settlement, Heard's insurer will pay Depp $1 million, which he has pledged and will donate to charities. The agreement also precludes both sides from filing another lawsuit in this case. Quote, "We are pleased to formally close the door on this painful chapter for Mr. Depp, who made clear throughout this process his intent to bring the truth to light," end quote. Partners Benjamin Chu and Camille Vasquez said in a statement. Quote, "This was never about the money. The jury unanimous decisions in favor of Mr. Depp and against Ms. Heard remain fully in place, and the payment of $1 million reinforces her acknowledgement of the legal system's rigorous pursuit of justice." End quote. In June, a Virginia jury unanimously ruled in favor of Depp following a 6-week trial and found that he had proven all elements of defamation. The 7-member jury awarded him $15 million and $2 million to Heard on account of her counterclaim. After the verdict, both sides appealed parts of the decision. Chu and Vasquez led the Brown Rudnick team, which also included partners Wayne Dennison and Rebecca McDowell Lecaroz, and associates Stephanie Kalman, Andrew Crawford, Jessica Myers, and Samuel Moniz. Before I talk about the terms of the settlement, based on those two statements that Amber Heard and Johnny Depp's lawyers put out on December 19, I want to talk about the considerations that come into play when parties are trying to settle their civil cases. First, it is not uncommon in civil cases to settle your case. In fact, over 90% of cases actually settle. Very seldom do cases in civil cases actually go to trial and even to the appeal. So most of the time, parties do settle in civil cases. So Johnny Depp and Amber Heard settling their cases against each other is not really uncommon. Parties usually settle in civil cases because they have to consider the time and the money involved in pursuing their claim. As you saw, the trial alone took 6 weeks, and then the appeal could even last up to 3 years. In my other video where I talk about the whole appeal system, including in the Court of Appeals up to the Virginia Supreme Court, it could take both of the parties, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, 3 years to fully resolve their appeal, depending on the outcome in each stages of their appeal. So as you can see, that cost a lot of money and a lot of time. In the 6 weeks jury trial, Amber Heard supposedly already incurred more than $10 million in attorney's fees and costs. And I've even seen larger amount that has been published in the press as to how much attorney's fees and costs she really has incurred. We will probably never know the totality of that because that also includes the attorney's fees and costs she had to incur in the appeal. So her attorney's fees and costs are accumulating exponentially the same way for Johnny Depp. Another reason why parties settle their case is actually touched upon by Amber Heard in her Instagram statement, and that is this statement. Even if my U.S. appeal is successful, the best outcome would be a retrial where a new jury would have to consider the evidence again. I simply cannot go through that for a third time. This is a very valid concern among parties in civil litigation. To have to retry your case or have to redo your trial is very time consuming and very draining on both parties. If Johnny Depp wins his appeal, or if Amber Heard wins her appeal, or if the Court of Appeal says both of you need to go back and retry your case based on what our rulings are here in Court of Appeals, just imagine both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard would have to go through the same 6 6-week trial, having to regurgitate the same thing that they testified before, presenting evidence. Of course, they might present new evidence now. There might be a different ruling based on what the Court of Appeal has said, but both of them would have to go through the same 6-week emotional turmoil that both of them had to go through. So most parties consider that heavily and have to think about whether they want to settle the case or have to go through that process again. Now that we've talked about the considerations parties usually think about when they're trying to settle their civil lawsuits, let's talk about what are the terms of their settlement. In the U.S. legal system, when the parties actually settle their cases, we write that out in a settlement agreement. We want to make sure that the terms of the settlement are all written out and signed by the parties. That's why the settlement agreement is very critical. Here, we probably won't see the settlement agreement unless both parties agree to issue that to the public. But based on Amber Heard's statement and the statement of Johnny Depp's lawyers, we can parse out some of the settlement terms that came into play here. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first important terms of their settlement involves money, specifically how much and who pays. We get an idea of the answer to those two questions in Johnny Depp's lawyer's press release, which specifically says Heard's insurer will pay Depp $1 million. That short phrase actually tells us a lot. Let me break this down. Remember how the jury awarded Johnny Depp $15 million, which was later reduced to $10.35 million because the $5 million punitive damages had to be reduced to $350,000 because in Virginia, there is a law that caps punitive damages to $350,000. That's why in the end, Johnny Depp ended up with $10.35 million verdict. Remember how Amber Heard was also awarded money by the jury in the amount of $2 million regarding her counterclaim against Johnny Depp pertaining to Adam Waldman's statement about the 911 call and hoax that her friends allegedly made. What this settlement term means is that the $10.35 million owed to Johnny Depp and the $2 million owed to Amber Heard have been settled and reduced to a whopping $1 million, which means that Johnny Depp's $10.3 million has been settled and reduced to $1 million, and then Amber Heard's $2 million has been reduced to zero because Johnny Depp is not paying her anything relating to the settlement terms. Here's a lesson learned about the legal system in the United States, and that is in civil trials, even if the jury awarded you a lot of money, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get it. That is because it depends if the other party can actually give you that money. For example, if the jury awarded you $100 million, it doesn't mean that the other party will actually give you $100 million and that you'll get $100 million. That is because if the party who owes you that money does not have $100 million, there's nowhere to get it. Another reason why parties settle the money side of the jury verdict is because it'll take a long time and even more money to get that jury verdict as to the money part. I'm specifically talking about the money part here, and I'll explain later as to why. But let's focus on the jury verdict, the money part, okay? So it takes a while to actually get that money that the jury awarded you. In my other video where I talked about that it could possibly take 3 years for Johnny Depp's appeal and even Amber Heard's appeal to fully resolve from the Virginia Court of Appeals and the Virginia Supreme Court. 3 years, that means a long time and a lot of money on both sides. That's why they think about that and they try to settle instead and say, you know what, instead of the $10.35 million, we are willing to give you $1 million so we can stop every legal process now and reach a resolution to this case. What do you say? That's likely what happened with Amber Heard's lawyers coming to Johnny Depp's lawyers and offering that $1 million. That's one of the things that came into play. And since Johnny Depp has always said that it's not about the money, and we saw that in the press release, again reiterated by his own lawyers, that this is not about the money, that's why he probably agreed to the $1 million that he will now pledge and donate. And I'm sure that was intentional use of both of those words, that he will pledge and donate that money to charity. Who's paying that $1 million? What I found interesting in the statement that Johnny Depp's lawyers issued is that they specifically said Heard's insurer. They used the singular, meaning only one insurance company will pay the $1 million. We know that there are two insurance companies involved with Amber Heard's legal disputes, and that is Travelers and New York Marine. So the question is, which of the two insurance companies will be paying the $1 million? Well, we don't know at this time, but I have a theory. Since it says Amber Heard's insurer, then it's only one of them that will be paying the $1 million. We know that Travelers has a policy limit of $500,000 and New York Marine has a policy limit of $1 million. I think that because of the $1 million policy limit by New York Marine, that New York Marine is the one that will be paying the $1 million to Johnny Depp, that they are Heard's insurer that was referenced in Brown Rudnick's press release. Of course, Travelers could also pay the $1 million by paying the $500,000 policy limit and then paying over the policy limit with another $500,000. But it's very seldom for insurance companies to actually agree to pay over their policy limit. And since the cap for Travelers was $500,000 only and New York Marine is $1 million, I think it's more likely that New York Marine agreed to issue their $1 million policy. Your next question is, why would they do that? For insurance companies, they always think about the business decision. This is something to think about and could be applied to your own situation as well if you're dealing with an insurance company. Insurance companies always think about the bottom line. I used to be a defense attorney before I became a plaintiff's attorney. That's why I know this, because I used to represent the insurance companies. And they are always thinking about what is the best business decision for our company. Now, for New York Marine to issue their $1 million, some of the things that they could be thinking about is, if Amber Heard goes through the appeal, it will be more attorney's fees and costs that they might be on the hook later on. And we'll talk about what the effect of this settlement is as to the lawsuits involving the insurance companies. But I'm just trying to give you a glimpse of what might be going on in the insurance company's thoughts and their lawyers in the discussion that come into play. And that is, if we pay this $1 million, it will still be a best value for us, because the attorney's fees and costs that might be incurred by Amber Heard if she goes through all of this appeal will be way, way more than $1 million. Already, the 6-week trial with the jury in Judge Ascarati's court incurred over $10 million in attorney's fees. So as you can see, for New York Marine to pay $1 million, considering that there's already over $10 million of attorney's fees and costs that we know have been incurred in Judge Ascarati's court, then $1 million is a good deal for them. It's a discounted rate for them. That's how they're thinking about that business-wise. Another settlement term that we know of comes from Amber Heard's statement in her Instagram account, specifically when she said, "I have made no admission." Now, in civil cases, it is very typical, very normal to actually include a clause in there saying that none of the parties are admitting any fault. So I assume that that particular term will also be included in the settlement agreement between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, that no parties have admitted fault. And we'll talk about this more in detail, how the jury verdict still stands as to defamation and actual malice found against Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So we'll talk about that in detail more, but just wanted to let you know that there is a no admission clause usually in a settlement agreement. So for Amber Heard to say that I have made no admission, for us lawyers, we see that and say, well, of course, you're going to say that because that is usually the case in civil litigation. So I don't really put much stock into that statement because it's a boiler clause that you put in a settlement agreement. Another settlement term that we can glean on from Amber Heard's statement is this sentence: there are no restrictions or gags with respect to my voice moving forward. What that sentence means to me is that their settlement agreement does not include a confidentiality clause. What that means is in some civil cases, even in cases that does not involve high profile parties like this, people would include confidentiality clauses in their settlement agreement. And that could include other terms such as the parties cannot disclose how much they settled the case, how much one party paid another, or they cannot disclose who paid what, because they're trying to protect their privacy or they're trying to protect their image. A lot of big companies out there who are settling with other people would usually have a confidentiality clause because they don't want people to know that they just settled for millions and millions of dollars, because they're afraid that it's going to look bad against them, or they're afraid that other people would want to sue them for the same amount of money. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when you're putting in your confidentiality clause. So here it sounds like Amber Heard and Johnny Depp both agreed that the settlement agreement will not be confidential in terms of the settlement terms. Now, whether or not the actual settlement agreement, the written document that both of them will sign, will be released to the public, that's a whole different story. They probably will not do that, but we know that there is no confidentiality clause regarding the amount of money and also that they settled their case. I read that sentence from Amber Heard's post to mean that there is no confidentiality clause. I do not read that as saying that she can just say again and again any other defamatory statements that she said that was implicated in the jury trial, in the trial that we just had with Judge Ascarati. That is because that would still be defamatory and she will still be liable. That sentence that she said doesn't give her a free rein, because if she says anything defamatory again that Johnny Depp wants to pursue, then that is still a possibility that another lawsuit will be filed against her. So she still has to be careful about what she says and make sure that it's not defamatory against Johnny Depp. The same for Johnny Depp and Adam Waldman and any other agents that Johnny Depp has supporting him. Another term in their settlement agreement is that both sides need to drop their appeal by December 22nd. And we see that in Johnny Depp's lawyer statement, where they said both sides will dismiss their respective appeals in the Virginia Court of Appeals on December 22nd. How that works legally is this. The Virginia Supreme Court Rule 5A36 says this: when a case has been settled or the appeal withdrawn at any time after the notice of appeal has been filed, it is the duty of counsel to notify the clerk of this court by filing a written notice that the case has been settled or the appeal withdrawn. On December 21, 2022, Johnny Depp filed a notice of withdrawal of appeal that said, "Comes now John C. Depp II by counsel pursuant to Rule 5A36 and hereby notifies this court that he withdraws his appeal in Depp v. Heard, record number 1072-22-4, and it was signed by Benjamin Chu." On December 21, 2022, also the same day, Amber Heard filed a notice of withdrawal of appeal that says the same thing, which is comes now Amber Laura Heard by counsel pursuant to Rule 5A36 and hereby notifies this court that she withdraws her appeal in Heard v. Depp, record number 1062-22-4, and it was signed by J. Ward Brown. I have a feeling that both of them had this boilerplate language and had to agree this is what we're filing with the Virginia Court of Appeals, and both sides just had to copy and paste and make sure that nothing else is added in that notice of withdrawal in case someone slipped in something in there. So this is a boilerplate notice of withdrawal, very benign, very neutral, just advising the Virginia Court of Appeals that they are withdrawing their respective appeals. What that means is now the Virginia Court of Appeals will not do anything regarding their respective appeal and most likely will just issue it as closed and done. That's it. Another settlement term that was included is specifically stated in Johnny Depp's lawyer's press release, and that is this sentence. The agreement also precludes both sides from filing another lawsuit in this case. What I take that to mean is that Amber Heard cannot sue Johnny Depp again relating to Adam Waldman's statements, and Johnny Depp cannot sue Amber Heard again relating to her op-ed. That just sounds fair because both sides already litigated that and went to trial. So makes perfect sense. Now that we talked about the settlement terms, what does this settlement actually means regarding the judgment against Amber Heard and the judgment against Johnny Depp? The jury verdict against Amber Heard that became a final judgment against her still stands. The same way as the jury verdict against Johnny Depp that became a final judgment against him still stand as well. Remember, the jury verdict on June 1st included two parts. The first part is that the jury found Amber Heard to have defamed Johnny Depp with actual malice. The second part is the money part that we talked about earlier, which is that they awarded Johnny Depp the 10.35 million, where actually it's 15 million that was reduced to 10.35 million. So those are the two components of the jury verdict. Even though the money part was settled, and that's perfectly fine, we talked about why the money part is settled. The part that is important, which is the legal part, which is the jury's determination that Amber Heard actually defamed Johnny Depp with actual malice, that still stands even with this settlement. The reason is because you cannot settle that part of the jury verdict. That's why people usually settle even while the jury is deliberating, because the moment the jury issues that verdict, it's done. It's only the money part that can be settled. The actual legal part as to whether or not the jury found you committed defamation will stand regardless as to what the settlement is afterwards. That's because if we're going to settle the jury verdict, all of it, then what's the point of going through the jury verdict, right? So we respect the jury and their decision, so that jury verdict still stands. That's why the lawyers for Johnny Depp in their press release specifically said that the jury's unanimous decision in favor of Mr. Depp and against Ms. Heard remain fully in place. They wanted to make sure people understand that that verdict that Amber Heard defamed Johnny Depp still stands even with this settlement. The same concept applies that the jury verdict against Johnny Depp relating to Adam Waldman's one statement still stands as well. That's why even if there is a clause in their settlement agreement that says no admission of fault that we discussed earlier, it doesn't really matter in regards to the jury verdict against them. The jury's finding that Amber Heard committed defamation with actual malice still stands whether or not she says that she admitted no fault. The next question is, what does this mean as to their appeals? As we talked about earlier, their appeal had to be dismissed by December 22nd. They actually dismissed both of their appeals one day earlier on December 21 by filing the notice of withdrawal of appeal per Rule 5A36. Since both parties filed their notice of withdrawal of appeal, the Virginia Court of Appeals will no longer read their briefs, they will no longer issue an oral hearing schedule, and they will no longer issue any written decision regarding both of their appeals. As we know, the briefs for both parties were coming up. They issued their press release statements of their settlement on December 19. Johnny Depp's response to Amber Heard's opening brief was due on December 23rd, and then Amber Heard's reply brief to Johnny Depp's response was due on January 6th. So there were still two more briefs that both parties had to write up, and actually Amber Heard would have had another brief to write. But the bottom line is, because the briefing schedule was still going on, writing briefs is very expensive and time consuming. So both parties probably want to just stop the bleeding of their attorney's fees and costs, especially Amber Heard's side, so that they settled the case right before any other briefs had to be filed. That's why the timing of that settlement happened on December 19th. Also, as one of my fellow legal analysts, Rich Schoenstein, has mentioned in our other podcast that you can go ahead and check out, he mentioned another consideration for most insurance companies, which is that at the end of the year, insurance companies usually want to settle as many cases as possible to close out their books. Again, it's a business decision. So that might be one of the considerations of the insurance companies here. That's why a settlement was put forward before the end of the year. The final topic we'll talk about is what happens next. We know that Johnny Depp has pledged and will donate the $1 million to charity. So that's the next thing that we'll see will be happening and we'll be hearing about in the press anytime soon. The second thing that I believe will happen is that the insurance lawsuits will likely settle soon. In my other video, I simplified the insurance lawsuits happening right now. Remember that there are two insurance lawsuits happening. That is the lawsuit between Travelers and New York Marine and the lawsuit between New York Marine and Amber Heard. I think that the lawsuit of New York Marines against Amber Heard will settle shortly. If Amber Heard is consistent with her sentiment in her Instagram post where she said that she just wants to move on, she doesn't want to spend any more time and money on any of these lawsuits, then she would want to settle these insurance lawsuits. New York Marine will also probably want to settle, and Travelers as well. As I mentioned, insurance companies always think about the business decision, especially at the end of the year. So here, if New York Marine is the one that paid for that $1 million settlement with Johnny Depp, then that is a win for New York Marine because they don't have to pursue the lawsuit against Amber Heard, and also they don't have to defend themselves against the lawsuit with Traveler and all the counterclaim involved in that. It's quite complicated, but again, I simplify that in my other video involving the insurance lawsuits. The settlement between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is definitely a win for these two insurance companies, Travelers and New York Marine, because based on business decisions, the $1 million is again a much lower amount that they have to pay as opposed to the jury verdict of $10.35 million, and also the attorney's fees and costs that have been incurred and is still being incurred by Amber Heard in the appeals process, which have been over $10 million. I'm not even surprised if her legal bills now have been $15 million or between $15 million to $20 million, because the appellate lawyers she has here are very top-notch and expensive. So her appeal lawyers are incurring a lot of the attorney's fees and costs. That's why both Travelers and New York Marine probably wanted to stop the bleeding of the money of the attorney's fees and costs, and also limit their exposure to the jury judgment of $10.35 million. That's why the $1 million they have to pay to Johnny Depp, as you can imagine, is a big discount and a big win for the insurance company. And now they can close out their file on this if they do settle the insurance lawsuits anytime soon. The last question you might have is, does that mean that Amber Heard won? Does that mean that Johnny Depp lost? Does that mean that Johnny Depp won? Does that mean that Amber Heard lost? First, in civil litigation, whenever we settle cases, it doesn't mean that one side wins completely. No. Settlement means that both sides have to give up something so that they can meet in the middle. So both sides have to lose something and both sides have to give a little for something. And here, Johnny Depp lost a lot of money because it's $10.35 million reduced to $1 million. But as Johnny Depp has consistently said in the trial and even after trial, and as his lawyers have also said, that this was not really about the money for Johnny Depp. He wanted to speak the truth. And I think he already got that, and he already won in the court of public opinion, as I mentioned early on during the trial in one of the articles that I was quoted in by New York Post. So here, Johnny Depp has already won, even if he's only getting $1 million that he's not even going to keep, that he pledged and will donate to charity. Again, consistent to his message that this is not about the money. As for Amber Heard, it could be considered a win for her as well, because if she's true with her sentiment that she wanted to settle so that she doesn't have to spend any more money, any more time, any more resources on this case, then she got that by settling this case and dropping the appeal. Both sides are no longer pursuing any legal issue against each other. So in terms of giving her the time and the money now to pursue other endeavors that she wants to, then this settlement is a win for her. But both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard also had to give up something in this settlement, which is expected, as I mentioned, in any civil cases. You have to get something and give up something to reach that mutual agreement of settlement. And here, Johnny Depp had to give up his appeal, and his appeal was that the jury found defamation against him relating to Adam Waldman's statement, and Amber Heard had to give up her appeal of the jury finding defamation against her with actual malice as well relating to her op-ed. So those are the big things that both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard had to give up. But in terms of Johnny Depp, though, he wanted to redeem himself in the court of public opinion, which he already did at the trial. And also, he redeemed himself when he won that judgment or the jury verdict of defamation against Amber Heard with actual malice relating to the op-ed that she wrote. So ultimately, even if the settlement happened right now, I think Johnny Depp still won in this settlement in terms of he redeemed himself already in the court of public opinion and even in the legal system of the United States. And I think that's enough for him. I hope this video answered a lot of your questions about the settlement. If you have anything more, please go ahead and drop your questions in the comments below and I'll try to answer them for you. In the meantime, please go ahead and click subscribe or like this channel. It will really help our channel out. And also, remember, make positivity louder. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2023. I appreciate you. Take care.